Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our special series, the MM360 Global Movement. We are calling Chatting with Slava the Jordanian. I'm your host, STJ, as some of you guys know me on Instagram, and I'm here, of course, with my one and only, my co-host, JD Yusef. Good morning, Yusef.
Good morning, Dr. Slava. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. How are you doing this morning?
Doing well. Thank you.
Awesome. Just as a reminder, in the MM360 Global Movement, we are advocating for mastering an unlimited mindset by eliminating limited beliefs and limited thoughts. So we thought of tapping into the concept of the traditional gender role expectations and beliefs from our conservative Eastern culture. Whether you are a first-generation immigrant American or first-generation American, I think many of you will find this very fascinating. I sure had so much fun tapping into the research and reading some articles about that concept. So we want to have this episode dedicated to telling our stories. And by telling our stories, we're hoping to uncover and discover some of the secrets, some of the tools, some of the tricks of the trade, so to speak, as far as how do we adapt, how do we embrace, how do we tolerate a whole new culture when we leave our old home and embark onto the new world, after leaving everything that we know and everybody that we love behind. Now, it could be different experience it is a different experience, and between whether you came from immigrated or you were born here, but you live in a household where they cherish and value those traditional gender roles, expectations, and beliefs. So, are you guys ready? Let's dive into it, okay? So I guess would be the first question is, what are those beliefs? What are those traditional gender role expectations and beliefs that we pack with us when we leave our home world and, like I said, embarked into a new world? What do they look like? How do they feel? And what kind of challenges that we go through in order to decide whether we want to embrace those traditional beliefs and make them our, Bible for our new life, or do we do half and half? Do we do a hybrid kind of mindset, whether we are maintaining and cherishing and valuing those beliefs, but also at the same time putting a modern twist, some practical concepts to it, and make it our own, right? Depending on where we land in the part of the world. Or do we just shed it all out? Do we just leave everything behind, completely strip those beliefs, create our own, 100% our own values and beliefs, and create a new life, create our identity? And that's one of the things we will tap on in the future. How does that impact the process of going through an identity crisis, which is a huge challenge for a lot of immigrants, or whoever is coming into the new world? Whether you're going from the west to the east or going to the east to the west, north and south, south and north, it doesn't really matter. It's the fact that when you strip your roots and implant them into somewhere, a different soil, that soil has different minerals, right? And has different vegetation, it has different nutrients that's going to feed you to grow into the person you want to grow into. Hopefully to fulfill your dreams, empower you, and be able to achieve the life that you planned and designed and sacrifice everything for in order to achieve. All right, if you guys are ready, let's dive into it. So I guess my question to you, Yusef, is if you can just sum up or list for us and our listeners, the values that you grew up with, and you can make it as simple as possible or as complicated, and you have the floor, basically. Go for it.
Yes, thank you. So growing up in the South, our white counterparts have a certain culture, right? That's very conservative. That honestly, the Arab world can identify with, right? It's about family values, and it's not only our white counterparts as well. African Americans certainly embody everything that's good, especially with family and what we're all about, right? But not taking anything that isn't deserved, right? Just these simple things that, again, are very mild, but it speaks volumes about how you're raised and your character, right, and where you come from. So that's something that we want to try to give to people. We want to share our culture. So.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And just like I mentioned earlier, it really depends where you land. So if you land in any spot in the world that, like I said, if you go from east to east, you can be in Jordan, for example, and you can go live in Albania. Eastern European, and I just read this article that interviewed 93 female, half from Western Europe and half from Eastern Europe. And they got together with them and give them a questionnaire to answer what are the principal characteristics of the female and the male in your culture. And the funny thing about that study, the results that came out, they matched a lot of their perception of the male-female role expectation in their society and in their culture. Now, the article will tell you that traditional or any gender role expectations is societal, structured beliefs and values, and they were put together to satisfy the need for society. So society needs men to go hunting and bring food in and protect the house, and they are the arm bearers. Then society needs this, so they structured that gender role on men because they're stronger, more masculine, they can, intimidating, back then. And then the females had the characteristic of being sensible, tender, caregiving. So the society looked at those characteristics in the female personnel, the innate female personalities, and they said, hey, you are qualified to take care of the young. You're qualified to take care of the home, to nurture, to teach, to love. And they gave those structured roles and beliefs for women because they needed to serve society. Now, the question is, does society still need that? Does society need the traditional gender role expectations and beliefs to serve and to make a continuum of that service to society? That's the debate that we're going to have very, very soon. So in my world, I was born in Saudi Arabia. My family is half Palestinian, half Jordanian. So inside the internal household that I grew up in is very much very modest, traditional Jordanian household. But when I stepped out of that household because of the obligation from the royal family being, intermarried into my family. My mom's sister married a member of the royal family, so my first cousins have HRH titles. So we had to conduct ourselves in an even more stringent, more strict, more traditional way to represent the royal family. But by far, my parents never really pushed that traditional gender role expectation. It was almost like, and Yusef, you can disagree with me, it's almost like this hidden language, like my mom will have the look, or she'll have the body language. I knew that I disappointed her saying something or acting in a certain way. I crossed the line with the expectation, but there was no reprimand and kind of attitude. There was no punishment if I didn't do so. If I felt like one day I'm going to be, a tomboy, wear my shorts and flip-flops and run around and play soccer with my brothers, she was fine. She goes, as long as you're safe, you're not hurting anybody, right? So she was fine with that. She did not punish me. It's like, no, don't wear shorts. You got to wear a dress. You're a girl. You shouldn't play soccer. She didn't care about that. But she made sure that when I stepped out of that house, I satisfied. And I met all criteria in representing their family and my family in a very favorable, desirable, fashionable, so many times, way that matches the expectation, whether the royal families. So that become part of practicing that constantly, switching the hat. That became part of my everyday personality is, okay, now I got to switch hats. I'm not Jordanian. I'm going to represent Saudi. When I'm home, I present in my Jordanian culture and tradition. The reason I am saying that, I want to go back to JD Yusef and ask you, what is the process or the story behind how you have embraced the adaptability? Because you are Joseph and you are Yusef too, right? In your community.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
You have mentioned to me in private that some friends, I call you Yusuf, some friend of you call you Joseph. So can you just walk us through the mindset or when did you realize, at what age, that, hey, I have two cultures. I might end up with two values. Can you share that with us?
Yes, certainly. So I guess the first time that I guess I can say I felt different, where there was a clash of cultures, was when 9/11 happened, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
As a fifth grader, right? As a fifth grader, I don't know how old you are, 10, 11, right? But I basically,
for sure.
I was young, right? And
yeah.
So I was also not old enough to understand what was happening around us, right? So long story short, I got picked off by one of the teachers who essentially sent me to the principal's office because a student said, oh, cool. Again, not understanding the gravity of what happened, right? Showing it to children. But all the attention was looked at me, and I didn't know why. I didn't say anything, right? And so immediately sent to the principals, parents got involved. That was the first time that I felt a bit different. So I guess to your second question, where does the Joseph and the Yusuf play in? It's almost like a survival mechanism. I can kind of put my guard down with some people and get deep, and others I can kind of pass, right, for, let's just say, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And people's true beliefs or guards are down, when they think that they're speaking to someone like them naturally, right? So it's very, very telling, and I've seen everything on the whole spectrum.
So that's very interesting because in 9/11, going back to that event, I just graduated from dental school and I was working in Maine, Gore, Maine, my first year as an associate. And that's the first thought that came to my mind. It's like, oh, crap. Here we go, because my practice last name is Abdurrahim. So that's my married name. That's my husband's last name. So of course I was nervous too. So I immediately, that belief that in order to survive this, in order to protect yourself, is keep your head down, don't talk about it. However, I did something very unconventional. The following day, we had the morning huddle at the practice, and I remember the owner, my mentor, he was traveling, and I wanted to have a moment of silence and prayer for all the souls that we have lost and the people that have survived, and pray for them. And the whole team was like, whoa, are we really talking about this? So I stood up and I said, in the spirit of the unfortunate events, let's have a minute of silence praying for all these souls. And we did. But the interesting thing, nobody talk to me about it after. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody said thank you. Nobody said we appreciate it. Nobody said, oh, I was uncomfortable with that. None of that. They were completely silent and completely impartial and neutral about it, which I appreciate that at that time, because honestly, when I did it, but that's just the maverick in me. When I did it, I thought, because I was always taught by my parents, do the right thing because it's always the right thing to do. And that is part of the pride. Speaking of beliefs, those are one of the values and the beliefs I still carry with me. So being a 30-year-old, just graduated from dental school, new appointment, new associate condition, that's my livelihood. It's like either I get fired because of that, or people are going to admire it. And it was fine. I did not get fired. So sometimes you have to listen to your innate intuition and say that this is the right thing to do. And the way you do it, if you do it in a very loving way, in a very supportive way, like I said, very calm, very neutral, death is death. It doesn't really matter who died, right? As human and as humanitarian diplomats, that's what I call all human, they're trying to make a difference in the world, is we have the duty and we have the job, responsibility in order to honor our death, period. It doesn't matter what religion you came from. But that is one of the example that I decided not to get rid of that thought, get rid of that belief that I got to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do in considering the circumstances. So that's very, very interesting. You were in 5th grade. I just graduated from dental school. So that gives you an idea of the age difference between.
I think what's more interesting is the response, though. You kind of had a more offensive response, right? And then other people had more defensive, right? Because they were shocked and stunned, and so it's very telling. And also, if I can elaborate, I think a lot of Americans at that time were expecting to have a lot of Arabs, both Muslim and Christian, kind of speak out more, and almost like we had something to do with it. And very, very interesting, because we don't ask any of our counterparts to apologize or do anything, that happens in the world, on their behalf. So, very, very unique, because at the end of the day, we're Americans. It affected us. We're Americans.
Yes.
So
that's absolutely true. And that's a very interesting point that you mentioned, depending where you are. So my husband, Ehab, was working with the National Semiconductor in South Portland, Maine at that time. And he came home. He was devastated, of course, and we talked about it. And he said, Slava, I was bombarded by people, engineers, project managers, knocking on his office door. It's like, are you okay? Are you okay? Is your family okay? Are you okay? So he was taken back by the level of concern and level of comforting attitudes that's coming towards him, because he didn't expect that. But that's interesting to say, because you did mention that depending where you are, whether people care that you're still human, you're an American, equal to them, and you have the right to, check on them as a colleague, as a friend, as a fellow citizen, even, where I'm sure in some states that wasn't the case. But what I'm trying to say is tapping into that traditional value that we need to respect the dead. That comes from our traditional beliefs, but we're deviating a little bit from the gender role expectations. So let me ask you this, Joseph. When did you realize, at what age you realized that, oh my God, I'm going out there into the world and I'm going to pursue my goals and my dream, my education? When did you realize that did you realize some of the traditional gender role expectations were hindering you or empowering you to achieve what you're trying to achieve?
That's a very great question. I guess as a male raised in an Arab household, especially the oldest, you have a lot of expectations and things that are asked of you. A lot of the time, I believe it's so structured that it doesn't allow one flexibility, say I didn't want to be a doctor, lawyer, or an engineer, right? So it's okay, but let's talk about next steps, right? Education is huge in our culture, but if that wasn't for me, that's okay. It doesn't mean I'm a failure, so I hope that elaborates a little bit.
Yeah, so when you say that it was okay not to be what you were expected to be, was that your own adjustments of these beliefs, or did you have the support in your household to say that, hey, don't stress out, it's okay, I understand that, we've been talking to you about get education, go to school, finish up, be the best you can be. And there's a joke in our culture that if you get a 95 out of 100, that's considered a failure in our household. So the expectations are really, really high. And I always wondered what kind of pressure that puts on us. But going back to your point that, again, was it your own, recognizing or realizing that I don't have to put that pressure on me? Or was it your parents supported you, said, don't worry about it, you can be whoever you want to be?
I think my grandmother had a lot to do with it. And I should say that a lot of strong females in my family who would kind of buck the system, if you will, and, just allow for a little flexibility. If you fall, it's okay, get back up, brush yourself off and do it again type thing. Yeah. So that was very, very transformative and powerful for my personal development, because I didn't have to conform to what people expected me to conform to, and that's okay. I'm not a failure. I can do this and be content.
Yeah. So where did you draw that validation that I appreciate myself, I'm good enough? Because the practicing or exercising, nagging about the traditional gender role, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, instead of you could do that, so changing the words is going to change the mindset. So you mentioned your grandmother. Can you tell us a little bit about your grandmother? Can you describe her?
Yes, born in the 30s and, had just a fifth grade education level, but was more than educated in numerous things. I learned a lot from her and my grandfather. But I think, again, it goes back to being products of war, right? And so being a product of war, you can't be as rigid as you want to be, because every day is kind of unpredictable, if you will, right? And so you're also in a survival mentality. So it requires one to be a little stronger than most, right? Dealing with adversity. So adversity is, I guess, part of the Palestinian struggle and the definition.
Yeah, it's true. So were you closer with your grandmother? Those are maternal or paternal grandparents?
Maternal.
Maternal grandparents. Were you closer to your grandmother than your grandfather?
I was definitely closer with both of them on my mother's side, certainly. And my father's side, I spent 10 to 20 years with my grandmother, but she was kind of away from us. So, but yes, my mother's side of the family, village folk, very simple, fallahin. And very, very humble, right?
Best type. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you would look back and talk to Yusef in high school right now you have achieved, you are a lawyer in Alabama. You are involved in so many nonprofit organizations. You're an amazing communicator, and you have this sense, and I've known you a short time, but I feel like I've known you forever. You have this sense of that genuine, authentic quality of a young man that all he wants is just to do the right thing. So because of that, that's my perception of you. And it's a measure of your conduct too. You know, you haven't showed me from all the dealings and interaction that we had that any sign of non-compliant, irresponsibility, no commitment, no tolerance. So you being Yusef, JD Yusef, looking back at Yusef in high school, what would you tell high school Yusef the best lesson you've learned from your grandmother?
Dr. Slava, you broke up at the very end. Sorry.
Now, can you tell us, or can you imagine talking to Yusef in high school? Now you are JD Yusef. What would you tell him the best lesson that you have learned from your grandmother?
Thank you for that question. I suppose it's resiliency. Just continue, striving for higher. As I used to remember my grandmother saying. So just always try to be, and it's not for anybody else. Certainly we do have that showy part of our culture, right? But again, being from a humble background, country people, that was non-existent. So it was for us, and also it was for, you can't take away something from us, right? Our land you could take away, but our education was something that was very, very strong to us. So
that's interesting. So you were born in California and you live in Alabama. I was born in Saudi Arabia with a Palestinian father and a Jordanian mother. And we were taught the same exact message, that my dad always drilled it in our mind that nobody can take your knowledge. They can come and take your house. You can get a divorce. You can lose your job. You can have a natural disaster, lose all your belongings. God forbid, you can lose a child, which I did. I lost my twin, a pregnancy at 13 weeks. But nobody can take my knowledge. Nobody can take my experience and my stories, and nobody can take my education. So that is interesting how we both grew up across the globe, but we still learned the same lesson. And that is not a traditional gender role expectation. That's a very egalitarian way, a modern way to look at, it's unlimited mindset, basically. I can do whatever I want. My dad's like, you can, he wanted me to be a fashion designer, but I insisted on dentistry. And he gave up at some point when I insisted on it. And he said, you can do whatever you want, as long as you stay safe, stay healthy. You can do anything you want to do. So it has nothing to do with the gender role expectation, but I would say that the way I grew up was a hybrid environment, especially for a girl. Like I said, we did have the very restrictive culture being in Saudi Arabia, the covering up, women can't drive. Women, now it's of course different. Back in my time, it was very, very restricted lifestyle. Now women can drive, they have their own clubs, they go ride horseback in the desert. They can camp in the desert. They can do so many outdoor activities. That was not a case in my time. So it was very restricted lifestyle. And I wonder if my parents said that, hey, it's already restricted. We should not really push the traditional gender role expectations yet on them while we were young. And I think my dad was the biggest advocate for that. But that's really interesting how we are now. We are, and we're still sharing that kind of value. That value I would never, ever shed or get rid of. So
very powerful.
That leads, what do you think of that? Isn't that fascinating, though? We both were taught from two different people, two different sides of the world, the same lesson and the same thought.
Yeah, and I think it just goes back to that inherent Palestinian story. We are not that much different, based upon gender, religion, even growing up in different parts of the world, right? We still try to keep our culture for a reason, because we want to share it, and it's also a guide path. It kind of helps us navigate this world. People who don't come from culture wish they had culture, right? Some people who have culture don't appreciate their culture, and I can't tell you how many times I've run into that, especially with our people here in the States, which I think it's good to have kind of a dual culture.
Mhm.
But yeah,
I think that's a very, very important point. And I mentioned that in the beginning of that episode, that there are, in my experience going through life, I met three different categories: either very stringent on, no, I don't feel safe letting go of all my traditional values, and I'm going to teach my children the traditional gender role values and expectation because I want them to be like me. And then you have the other group that I met. I've been in this country about 37 years, that have a hybrid, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And then the third group are completely westernized. You go to their house, it doesn't feel, there's no one speckle of any Arab traditional artifact, or even the food is different, and they adapt the Western, whether French or Italian, Portuguese kind of lifestyle. But at the same time, even meeting those people that shed all their traditional values and recreate and redesign their own values coming to the West or migrating, when you talk to them, they have a little bit of glimpse, but you have to be an Arab or Middle Eastern to actually pick up on that. They have still the essence of that traditional life still in them, which is fascinating, because you would think you can shed it and reprogram yourself and rehabilitate, but it's part of your blueprint. I don't think that we will ever be able to just erase it completely, because we grew up with it. Don't you agree?
I completely agree. It's something that's a part of us, right? And I don't know, where that delineation, where you start to kind of distance yourself from it. Maybe it's second, third, fourth, but certainly as a first generation Arab American, we certainly do see things differently. And I would also add, it's not like we completely fit in back home either. We stand out, and it's similar to this country. It's almost like I'm not American enough, right? So this is also an ongoing struggle back and forth, right?
Yes, that's true. And a short story to shed a light on that concept is when I never lived in Jordan. So we used to go, my dad owned a property, an apartment building, and we used to have an apartment there. He rented the rest of it. So we were playing in the yard, in the street with the kids, and some of the kids would throw rocks at us. Literally just go back to Saudi, go back to Saudi. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, you guys are traitors. You left your country to chase the money. Go back to Saudi, go back to Saudi. And I used to run to my mom, and actually, once they got my younger brother in his head, went back to my mom. She goes, what happened? I said, these kids keep telling, go back to Saudi. I don't understand. So not until I got older and realized that, because of their mindset and believing in all that traditional values, you do not leave your country regardless of how your, life conditions, how bad they are. It doesn't matter. You struggle with the country, you stick with the country, you're loyal to the country, you work with the country, but you don't quit on the country and leave so you can make more money somewhere else. You stay in the country, build it up, work it, pay the taxes as a service that you return back to your community. You don't just leave. Of course, these kids did not know the circumstances of my parents' life, but that's another episode. But I guess, so that's just an example of, I agree with you, Yusef, is that's why I had the option to go back to Jordan, to go back to school and university. But when I sat down and I thought about it, I couldn't identify with Jordan. I identify with Saudi because I lived there all my life for 19 years. And when I told my dad, I don't think I can live there. I just don't, I have to, it's going to be a lot of work for me to learn the customs, tradition. Yeah, our household was Jordanian, traditional Jordanian life and family oriented, but it's different than dealing with, government, the public, the regulations, how to drive there. I never drove in my life, because back in the day, like I mentioned before, women were not allowed to drive in Saudi. So I said, you know what? I vacation in the United States. I know United States customs and lifestyle. This is exactly what I want. And that's when I chose to go back. But I guess my last question to you is, did you see the difference in the traditional gender role expectations between you and your sister, for example? How can you walk us through? Can you tell us a story behind how I know she's not there to defend herself nor to make a statement, but as a brother, viewing that from the inside out, did you view any pressure on her compared to you and your brother?
Yes, certainly. She, I would argue, probably had a little more pressure on her. Being a female and also parents wanting her close to home. Yet she was brilliant and could go anywhere she wanted in the world, right? There was that constant back and forth, that struggle where, I will say this, and I think it's appropriate. We have a saying in our culture, again, from my grandmother. I love these old sayings. They weren't educated, but they were educated. But
they're very wise quotes.
Very, very wise. But she used to tell me, even about my mother, her daughter. الأم بتخرب من المحبة. The mother will mess up, for lack of a better term, from the love. And she loves her kids so much, and this is a common theme among Palestinians, right? Our lives, everyone's lives are precious, right? But also in a time of war, right? We don't know what's happening, what to expect. So that being said, this love and you want to protect, could ultimately hurt the child at the end of the day, right? It's hurt them in the way of not maybe physical, but inhibit them, in their growth, their development. So, but yeah, I will say she probably had it a lot difficult than we did. Certainly, very proud of her.
Yeah,
she's a doctor right now. So,
she's a physician.
She is a PhD.
Oh, in what? Do you mind me asking?
Political science and socioeconomics.
Good for her. See, good for her. That's awesome. And that's what the Western world calls tough love. But I agree with you that saying, I heard it from my own grandmother, my paternal grandmother, because she used to make that comment when she observed how my mother treated the boys, the boys, you're going to make her proud, and this and that. And she used to tell her, just ease out. It's okay. It's okay. And she's a lot more traditional, Nebuchadnezzar, with the whole, she looked like a little babushka, like an Eastern European grandmother with the little scarf, and she has her cigarette. Just complains about life. And that her story is very tragedy, how she ended up getting married, speaking of traditional gender role expectation pressures, and how she ended up exiting the world. It's a very, very sad story, but it will be a different episode. And with time, I would definitely share that with you guys. But that's really interesting. And it sheds some light to how parents, and I agree with you, Yusef, depending on the circumstances that you actually extracted yourself out of, it will determine whether you want to really put the pressure on the traditional gender role expectations and value. And I believe now I am 55-year-old and as an adult and a professional, and I met thousands and thousands of parents through my 25 years of practice. And my observational data is telling me that some parents will pressure the kids in a sense of it's a technique of protection. Because think about it, if you can protect your children by surrounding them with those boundaries, traditional gender role expectation, don't cross a line, you're a boy, you're a girl, this and that, this is expected of you, that you're going to be responsible, that's a pressure on you to achieve so and so. They believe, especially if those parents never finish high school, for example, back home, because they had to flee war zone, conflict, starvation, famine, and to look into a different parts of the world in order to survive and have a better life. But it can be used as a protective shell around your children in order for, okay, I know they're safe because they know the expectations. Where other parents think that, oh, that's not the way to protect my child. I want to teach my child that there is unlimited, right, possibilities for them, because I want them to be free of what I had to deal with, what I had to live with. So that's interesting that my grandmother, who's very conservative, never even been to high school. I think she quit at sixth grade, if I'm not mistaken, because she had to get married at age 14, 15 to her first cousin, my grandfather, while she was in love with the neighborhood boy. And she threatened her father to take her own life if he does not give his blessings for the neighborhood boy. So her dad looked at her. She locked herself in the bathroom and she goes, if you don't allow me to marry him, I'm going to take my own life. He said, fine, I have 5 other girls to marry off. That's his answer to a 14, 15-year-old child so in love with a neighborhood boy, and she has been pressured to go through with an arranged marriage to her first cousin, who's my grandfather. They end up getting married, had 3 children, lived a very interesting life. But that is one of the examples of, I don't know if her father wanted to protect her from that boy, and to say, like, no, you're marrying your first cousin because that's safer for you. That's guaranteed. And the beliefs in marrying family within a family, because the fathers has a better chance impacting and influencing and pressuring the husband if he crosses the line. So if think about it, right? So if that neighborhood boy mistreated my grandmother, let's say they got married and he turned out to be a loser, basically. Her father doesn't have a whole lot of authority to tell that strangers, like, hey, you owe me. But he goes, no, you said okay and I married her. Where if my grandfather, the first cousin, crosses the line, that's his nephew. So he can go to his brother, right, and say, hey, your son is mistreating my daughter. He needs to stop. There's a weight to that, right? So all I'm saying, I'm not supporting arranged marriages. I'm not supporting forced marriages. I skipped 3 marriages myself. There's a difference between arranged marriage and forced marriage. That was forced marriage of my grandmother. But I can sort of understand where her father was coming from. In order to protect his daughter's rights, it will be a lot easier to manipulate and control and manage his nephew than some stranger. Does that make sense? What do you think of that?
That's a very, very common story back home. Again, going back to that safety, going back to our people just trying to think 1 to 2 steps ahead, which is, again, very much us. We certainly don't take things as they come, right? Very, very proactive. But I think that's, again, a safety mechanism.
Yes.
That everybody kind of participates in,
Yes, and they hope to pass that on to generation to come. But it's up to that new generation whether they see the value on those, traditional gender role expectations and say, hey, that is really good tool to protect my child from a stranger that might marry her. Or do you put a modern spin on it and say that, you know what? Yeah, I am going to be inspecting whoever comes to my house and marry my daughter. But also at the same time, I want to give my daughter a leeway to express her emotions. She has the right to experience love. She has the right to live through romance and marry for love with a certain guidelines that will be guarding my daughter's right and my daughter's safety and my daughter's happiness. So I get it, but at the same time, it's almost like a balance. just like everything in life, right? Things have to be in moderation in order for us to stay healthy. And that's the bottom line, is the impact of whether you grew, like I said, under very extreme traditional gender role expectations or egalitarian values or both. It doesn't really matter as long as we end up being healthy after practicing such a lifestyle. Whether that's, I have seen families that practicing those traditional gender role expectations limited their children, but some of them did not. What are your thoughts about that? Is it healthy or is it not healthy? Do you believe that people should do whatever works for them? But how about the impact of mental health and our well-being, that kind of pressure?
Very interesting. So I believe that there obviously has to be a balance, but it's important not to look at things from maybe a Western perspective, especially looking in on different cultures, right? I guess it goes back to what's good for the family. You really have to, again, communicate.
Yeah.
Really know what your family is needing and wanting. Very, very difficult and more challenging, I would argue, once you're coming as an immigrant, because now you're exposing your family, your children to a new environment, new people, new culture. And a lot of those needs don't get fulfilled towards the family because the mother and father are trying to survive. They're trying to learn, right? And so the kids are young and they have to kind of fend for themselves. So very, very unique dynamic.
Yes, indeed it is. And honestly, I am not sure. There's no cookie cutter for everybody. And I'm not, the message that we're sending out, we're not saying you strip all your, traditional values. But like Yusef said, maybe you can redesign them. First of all, I teach that you have to heal from the pressure. If that had an impact on your mindset and your mental health, you need to heal. You need to pick a healing mentor or healing coach, heal from that. Then design your own values, right? Whether you want a hybrid, whether you want to pull out of the traditional values and create your own. It's like, no, I'm going to keep that. Because remember, as you design your new values, your mind and your emotions are going to go through the panic, the guilt, the feeling of betrayal, oh my God, these are my roots. How can I neglect it? How can I change it? Am I going to be my own person? How about again, the traditional tribal connection that we talked about and we're going to continue to talk about in our culture. So, and then transform. That's the last step. So heal, design, then transform. And I had to go through that process myself at age 53. For half a century, I've been walking the line of those values and those are traditions. Yeah, I escaped 3 arranged marriages. I don't know how and why, but I know why, because I want to pursue my career, and I didn't want to be tied up with that. And after the story of my grandmother, it's like, no, I'm just became a stigma to me. I would have been very, very well off, very, very comfortable, very prominent, very affluent life, but that wasn't enough for me. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's when you decide to say that, hey, I'm going to split on my own, do my own thing. But I did tap into all these values and you thought as a guide. And I felt that if I needed protection, I definitely pulled out of those old-fashioned traditional values and beliefs. Did it limit me? In some ways, yeah, it did. In some circumstances, yeah, they did. But I felt in my case, my experience, it protected me and helped me stay focused to stay on my path in order to achieve what I needed to achieve. Did it empower me? In certain circumstances, yes, it did. And so I agree with Yusef, you have to pick and choose when to use it. It's like different gears shifting on the car. Now, I want to accelerate, I need that gear. I need to slow down, I need to push into that gear. Do you agree? What do you think of that?
I agree with everything that you just said. I think you hit the nail on the head. And hearing your experience, again, all the different circumstances, different person, different gender. I can relate to a lot of it, right? So I think it just goes back to the essence of a similar struggle and story that we kind of all have as children of a diaspora, right?
Yes, absolutely. All right, so we are reaching to the end of the hour. I want to thank all our listeners for joining in. Please like and share, and it's going to be on the all the podcast platforms, and plus on the MM360 Global Movement YouTube channel. Those episodes will be uploaded if there's a certain schedule for them. And I hope, like I said, you guys have enjoyed this. And if you have any comments or any questions, please let us know. This will not happen without you, without our listeners. And we will continue to share our stories in order to uncover and discover all the secrets and all the tools for us to master an unlimited mindset by eliminating limited belief. Thank you so much and have a great day. Thank you, Yusef.
Thank you, Dr. Slava. Bye for now.
Bye.